quite a bit, and he is truly a prolific writer, and agree with the title that folks have given him, the Dean of Recovery. But he was saying there are three ways to deal with social stigma, if you will. One is to protest. Stigma and discrimination are illegal, and you need to protest that and bring it to the forefront and hold the folks that are doing it accountable. But there also is an educational component he talks about, and then there's a contact component. And this is not new. I got this from a 2009 paper that he did with Arthur Evans. And so I think you had suggested it. We need a multi-pronged approach where stigma is alive and well, and where folks are comfortable with that. We need to hold them accountable, but we need to do some education as well within the field, as well as outside the field. And then I think we need to look at establishing new contacts and reaching out to non-traditional groups, if you will. The recovering community, I believe that we could do more in reaching out to them.
I think that is, I tell you, I have been through National Alcohol and Drug Addiction Recovery Month and its events and the testimonials that we see from individuals in recovery. And it's almost painful to see what Daphne was saying in terms of a shame-based approach to their recovery. And it really, I think it's an area where folks in recovery are going to have to work with other folks in recovery to bring them along to a comfort level where individuals can then be free of that self-perception in order for them to change their language. Do you agree, John?
Mm-hmm. I do, absolutely. I think this issue of stigma, which is directly obviously connected to the terms that we use, is very important. I was just thinking about the World Health, this is not a US phenomenon either, it's cross-national. The World Health Organization did a study in the late 90s across 14 different countries, looking at 18 of the most stigmatized conditions, including drug and alcohol addiction. So they had things like being homeless, being a criminal, being HIV positive, all these very heavily stigmatized conditions. And what they found cross-nationally, drug addiction was number one. Mm-hmm. Alcohol addiction was number four. So two of the top four were the most stigmatized conditions cross-nationally. And stigma, and that surprised me. I mean, obviously we all know that these conditions are very stigmatized. Just how stigmatized, I didn't realize that they would come top of that list. So that was very surprising to me. So what we're dealing with is possibly and probably the most stigmatized of all social problems, if you frame it in that, put it in that framework. And I think importantly, there are two factors that I see moderate stigma. One is cause, and the other is controllability. Cause being it's their fault, controllability, they can't help it. So there's those two factors. And I think that science now has contributed to our understanding that people with a substance use disorder, they may have had the initial choice to pick up alcohol or another substance, but it's not their fault that they become addicted. And this is something that's been around for a long time, but it eludes most of us, I think, most of the time. And the other thing is controllability. Science has now, as I mentioned earlier, helped our understanding in terms of people's inability, the impaired control, which we know is an essential, perhaps the essential characteristic of addiction, is this inability to control, this impaired control over use, despite harmful consequences. And so this issue of cause and controllability and the science that's really informed that have really helped, I think, to destigmatize. And we need to get that message out, that these are health problems, that they are treatable. They are probably the most, have the best prognosis of any mental disorder on the severe end of the spectrum. Most people eventually recover from a substance use disorder. And these are the kinds of messages, because I think out there's a lot of negative thinking and nihilism regarding the prognosis for individuals with addiction. They're hopeless, there's no chance, we can't help them, and they lie all the time, and these kinds of very biased statements, which, sorry, you can say
That's
something.
fine. I just want to say that when we come back, I want to get into the notion of how do we sustain a conversation of holding folks to be responsible in a way that doesn't stigmatize or doesn't discriminate. Because if we need to look at things differently, then we need to substitute that which we think now with something more positive, and we need to learn how to do that. We'll be right back.
For more information on National Alcohol and Drug Addiction Recovery Month, events in your town, and how you can get involved, visit the Recovery Month website at recoverymonth.gov.
People trapped by drug or alcohol addiction often feel like there's no hope, no way out. But for every lock, there's a key. And if you have a problem, it's good to know there are real solutions to help you get free. For drug or alcohol treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
People who suffer from drug or alcohol addiction sometimes say hurtful things. They drive the people who love them most away. If you know someone who suffers from drug or alcohol addiction, listen. Try to hear what they are really saying. Know that there is hope and help them find their voice again. For drug or alcohol treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Hi, I'm Michelle Monroe with the Road to Recovery, and we're here today in Maryland getting some opinions on what people think about different languages used in the substance abuse and mental health arena. If I said that somebody had a drug and alcohol addiction, what would you think that means?
I think the person has certainly a health issue problem that needs to be attended to.
I would think of people struggling in difficult circumstances with certain underlying issues that lead them to feel that they need to use those things as an outlet.
I think of an illness. I think of a sickness that's hard to overcome. And I think that the person needs support, as much support as possible.
I think about people who need help, and they need to find help as soon as possible.
So what if I said alcohol and drug problem? What do you feel about that?
It's a problem that needs to be fixed. That's what I start thinking. You need to fix it. You need to find a way to fix it. If there needs to be out there more programs for these people, more resources where they can get to as soon as possible, where they can speak their languages, because alcohol doesn't have any color or any face, any language. It comes in it can be anybody.
And then problem sounds like you can deal with it if you seek for help. Then addiction sounds more like you are in serious problem. I think it's the same thing. I mean, I think that if you have an addiction, you have a problem. If you have a problem, you could possibly have an addiction. So the same thing goes. They need help, they have an illness, and they need support.
If I told you I was in recovery, what does recovery mean to you?
I think you're really trying to get back on the right track, and I would certainly pray for you and hope that you could stay there and get better, because recovery is very difficult. First of all, you have to admit that you need the recovery, and then when you recover, it's a long process.
I think when a person says that they are in recovery and they are trying to get over their addiction, one must give them a chance and believe them.
Recovery to me is a first step. Just because you're in recovery, that doesn't mean that you're going to be recovered completely. But it's the first step for you to get to where you need to get, to be able to say, I used to be that.
If you're telling me that you're in recovery, I'd say that you are trying to get your life together if you have a serious problem, and that you care about becoming a better person.
If somebody was trying to get into recovery and needed treatment and needed help, do you have a role in their recovery? And if you have a role, what role do you think you would need to play?
I've been taught that the whole family as well as the community plays a role in your recovery. So
I think you really have to love them and help them through it, and don't prosecute them and make them think that they're doing something wrong, and give them support.
If the person is open to letting you help them, just really being there to support them, give them that emotional support that they need, I do have a role. I think people who's seeking for help, they do need support from others because obviously they cannot cope by themselves with the issues they may have. So I guess my role will be like just be there and supportive and try to be a friend and understand what they are going through.
I'd probably just want to speak into their life as much as possible and try to encourage them that I think realization for them is the most important, to realize that they have an addiction problem and then to go about trying to help them through recovery and being as supportive as possible in the process.
Do you think that recovery is possible and that people can make a change?
It will be hard. It's very hard, but it's possible. Anything's possible.
Yeah, I absolutely think recovery is possible, and it's something different for each person, but it's probably a long process and will take a lot for them to be able to recover.
Recovery is definitely possible. Where there's a will, there's a way. So everybody who really wants to recover, I believe they can recover, but they just have to really try.
Yeah, I think you can recover. I think a lot of it depends on environment. You got to get away from what you're doing, and if you want to do it, you can.
So Daphne, how do we change the paradigm? How do we begin to use positive language, person-centered, people-first type of language?
We begin by being conscious of the words that we're using, and there are a number of words and papers and reports and so forth out there that promote words like health and recovery and person-centered and mutual support and so forth. And so there's a model that talks about going from unconscious incompetence at something where you do something and it's not what you want to do, but you're not even aware of it, to conscious incompetence where you begin to be aware that these aren't the terms I want to use, to conscious competence, and we're starting to be more aware of the terminology we're using, to unconscious competence. And I think that's what we want to do as a field, is move to a point where we're automatically speaking in positive, person-centered, health-centered approaches.
You two folks are in recovery. Now, there are going to be folks out there that are going to say, all right, based on what John was saying, how do you then hold a person responsible for their need to keep themselves in the straight and narrow, even though they may have had a recurring need for treatment? How do we then begin to reshape that to still not be offensive, but to get a point across?
Well, I really, connected to what you're saying, I really want to comment on what Daphne was saying. I think that we have to demand that people begin using the right language, and there's a very simple and easy and concrete way to do that. One of the things that I've noticed is that people are not adapting the new language, but they're still being supported in certain ways. Whenever someone has to write an RFP for something, they need to be using the correct language. I've seen RFPs that have been written, and I can see by the language that's being used that they're not moved to this whole framework of recovery, but they're still being awarded. So we need to help people to begin to use, and if we do that, they're going to pick it up immediately because people need, organizations need funding.
Yes.
Well, I believe SAMHSA has done a great job in laying the framework for, if you will, for the type of discussion that I think needs to happen. And I think it's around the recovery-oriented system of care model that's person-centered, and it's based more on a holistic approach, that it's person-driven, if you will. And I think we just need to build upon that. I think that's the way we begin to have the kind of conversations where all of a sudden, instead of 200,000 recovery advocates, you're making greater headroads into the 20 million people in recovery that Ms. Hyde talks about. So instead of reaching less than 3 million and providing services, we make inroads into the 22.5 million that still need that. Our message isn't resonating with multiple groups. And so as a field, I think we want to look at our message. And I think to have that universal language is going to mean that we can't view non-traditional groups as still target populations, if you will, from a deficit perspective, but then we begin to view them as key informants, that they have valuable information that can add to this discussion. And until we begin to do that, it's our whole efforts are going to be based around self-serving. We need this particular language to protect our funding stream. We need this particular language to add value to the work that we do, versus our primary purpose is to provide the services and the help for people that are struggling with substance abuse or addiction and any of the other issues that they present to us with.
Or we need a language whereby I can recognize where I need to do additional work, and it's not going to be belittling me or diminishing my worth, but that I can pick up the pieces and move forward again in that path to recovery. Because I think one of the things that we learned early on with the recovery-oriented system of care notion was that, particularly Thomas Kirk's model in Connecticut, is that the person is considered to be in recovery the second they have that aha moment, that they realize that they need treatment for their illness, and from then on, they still consider themselves in recovery. Would that work? I mean, in other sectors?
I think that that's very, very important. And one of the things that I want to say is that in terms of the development of the recovery-oriented system of care, the focus on language has not been something that I've seen. And I think that everything we do, if we're doing a conference, whatever we do, there needs to be a component in there on language. We really need to push this, because it's something that we can do that doesn't cost a lot of money, but it's key. It's key in how we define and how we build our systems.
Well, I believe very strongly that the work that CSAT has done, and Kathy Nugent within one of our branches with the Addiction Technology Transfer Centers is beginning to do that quite a bit. I think that it is a very conscious effort at, we're struggling internally and working at it. And so, the process it's almost like eating an elephant. How do you begin to eat an elephant? It's got to be one bite at a time. So we are beginning to make inroads into that area, particularly with the materials from that are being developed within the ATTC. Certainly the planning partners for Recovery Month, right, Daphne?
Yes, indeed. That's been such a valuable group to move the conversation forward throughout the year, not just in September during Recovery Month, but throughout the year, to keep this issue elevated.
So the question is what type of system is somebody coming into? I think it's a system that needs to be all-encompassing, that can